They tend to see you in your worst as well as in your best and choose to stay with you instead of ignoring you like humans. You might think of them as just animals without emotions, but they do feel more than many humans do. Undoubtedly, pets are our best buddies, yet we always listen about unfortunate accidents where they harm humans. We even get scared when we notice our pets behave unusually, right? This eye-opening incident is about two Labrador retrievers who barged into a woman's lawn and started to bark at her until she decided to act upon it. When the reason behind this strangeness was revealed, the world stood speechless on the odds that came together that day. According to the American Kennel Club, Labrador Retrievers are friendly, active, outgoing, and high-spirited companions. They are ranked as the most popular dog breed of the country. Not only this, but they are suggested by many animal lovers as one of the best breeds to qualify as therapy dogs. They are smart and learn quickly. So how come two Labrador Retrievers went out of control one fine day? Alexandra Naspolini is a resident of St. John's, Jacksonville. The area is located in the peaceful outskirts of Florida. People who live in such areas tend to feel calmer on day end than those who live in metropolitans. She too lived and worked in a calm state of mind. She had fixed hours of work and a fixed routine of work, and that was everything but ordinary. Instead of buying her favorite cappuccino from the nearby Starbucks, she was desperately in need of some me time. And what were the chances that out of all the days, Alexandra chose this particular day to stay home for a little longer, when she was completely unaware of the disaster? That was one beautiful morning, and her recent efforts on the lawn were shining bright under the sunshine. She sat next to the window of her living room, admiring the lawn and the chirping of birds. Moments like these were no less of meditation for her. You must be thinking, how did two fully grown Labrador Retrievers even enter there? This is the specialty of localities like St. John's, that people have never felt the need to fence their houses or building high walls to prevent robberies and other stuff. They felt safe anyway. But when two Labrador Retrievers popped up inside her lawn out of nowhere and stared at her, she understood that something about this morning was seriously wrong. When Alexandra was lost in her thoughts about what she'll be eating at dinner, two figures started to appear at the corner of her lawn. At first, they were just figures of black and brown colors. Second, entered the black. They didn't start to bark at her right away. So, the moment they hopped inside her lawn, Alexandra could sense the extremeness of the situation. They weren't in her lawn to play with her. For a moment or two, the dogs ran into the front yard. They were gasping. Despite looking exhausted, they started to bark anyway. Alexandra, who just wanted to have a cup of coffee in peace, cursed the way her day started, with two dogs barking at the top of their voice. She had no clue that these dogs were about to lead her to the scene which she will never be able to forget. Why would anyone lose their dogs out in open? Did someone abandon them? Or did they run away? What were they so mad about? Were they demanding something? What were they trying to grab her attention for? All these questions started to irritate Alexandra, and trust us when we tell, so many things were happening over the course of minutes. This pair of Labrador Retrievers were fully grown dogs. Surprisingly, by this time most of the owners get their pets trained, which means the dogs rarely ever misbehave. And seeing these two mature dogs behaving aggressively was a very peculiar thing in itself. Well, as they say, there's always more to the picture. And in this scenario, there was so much more to this picture. When her blissful moment was interrupted by the barking, Alexandra was scared for a minute. She didn't own a pet, nor was she too fond of them. Then what were they doing at her doorstep? What was it that they were looking for? Also, she noticed one more thing about this pair of dogs. They were not strangers to her. In fact, she has seen them before, but where? That's when it clicked to Alexandra that Maureen Hatcher, also a resident of St. John's, must be the owner of these dogs. Her guess was right. The two dogs continuously barking at her were Sadie and Bella, who lived with Maureen a few doors away from her home. Even though she knew where these dogs came from, there was no answer to the question, why? The 62-year-old Maureen Hatcher started her day by feeding her two furry friends. Unlike any other day, her grandson Tyler wasn't there for her. Then she went to take a bath, leaving the dogs in the living area. But these dogs were well trained and used to stay alone half of the time. So, what made them react on this particular morning? Whatever happened next in that house was recorded in the camera that was installed on the door. It showed how the two dogs suddenly started to bark loudly. They weren't fighting amongst themselves, but were trying to be heard. Heard? Why? Bella and Sadie ran towards the main door. The security footage recorded their act of ultimate smartness where they unlocked the door with their front leg and hurried out of the door. This made it clear that everything done by this pair was on purpose, and they chose to stop at Alexandra's doorstep for a reason too. From Maureen's house to Alexandra's, all the houses were either empty or no one was in the front yards or near the windows. Well, this is clear that the dogs wanted to grab a human's attention. For what reason, nobody knew it, but did Alexandra understand it? Alexandra recalled that Sadie was the first one to enter. She said, "I usually am very routine, but that day, I didn't do my usual. I was sitting on the floor drinking coffee and saw her outside. Then I heard the other dog barking." Alexandra walked out of the door and knew it wasn't a threat call but a call for help. The two dogs were freaking out and barking unstoppably. On taking a closer look, she got certain that they were Maureen's dogs. Alexandra started to ask them, "Where's Mom? Where's Mom?" Alexandra decided to take them home as she was late for work anyway. Little did she know of the distressing condition she was going to find herself caught up in. Alexandra stops to ring the doorbell outside Maureen's house while the dogs pushed the door and ran inside. Somehow Alexandra started to suspect the negative vibes all around her. Instead of turning back and leaving, Alexandra opened the door and questioned, "Is anyone home?" and called for Maureen, who didn't reply. Bella and Sadie were still barking continuously. Alexandra called out hesitantly, "Hello?" Again her voice remained unheard. With no other option left, she followed the dogs, who took her straight to the bedroom. And there it was, something she wasn't expecting even in her nightmares. Before Alexandra could even enter the room, Sadie passed by her and jumped on the bed. As the terrified woman entered the dark room, she knew that she was just a few steps away from knowing the heart-wrenching reality she wasn't prepared for. All of a sudden, all the barking stopped and Sadie looked at Alexandra from the bed. It was the time when Alexandra said to herself, "This is it." She had no idea of what lay ahead, yet she was hoping for everything to be fine. Alexandra took those heavy steps and said, "Mrs. Hatcher?" She could see the mass lying on the bed, but there was no movement. As she stood right next to the bed, she prayed for this to be just a bad dream that will break any moment. Horrified enough she couldn't touch the mass on the bed. Instead of going straight for the mass, Alexandra went to draw the curtains of the room to see what was it lying on the bed that Sadie wanted her to see. As soon as the sunlight entered the room, it was clear what she assumed to be a mass was actually a woman lying on the bed. Looking at the woman lying unconscious, Alexandra stood in disbelief. But that wasn't going to help, and she had to control her emotions and run into action. She took a deep breath and touched the woman's shoulder to see who she was. She wasn't unconscious but losing control over herself. The woman groaning in pain was Mrs. Hatcher. Her mouth drooped downwards from the left side. She couldn't speak, but her eyes narrated the story of terror that she was facing. Alexandra immediately calls 911. Maureen's brain wasn't getting enough oxygen, and if the help gets delayed, she might not survive. She knew her neighbor had less time, but she cannot do anything about it. Did she receive help on time? St. Johns County Fire Rescue reached within 20 minutes, and both Bella and Sadie watched their loving mom taken away in the van. When the brain is deprived of blood, cells die and permanent brain injury can occur. Timing is everything, told Nima Agibraham, an interventional neurologist. One of the most important factors that can lead to a good outcome for patients in these situations is to get the blood vessel open quickly and successfully, explains Agibraham. The staff was working as quickly as they could. Were they able to save her life? Surgeons at the Baptist Medical Center used a sophisticated dye to find the blood clot that had caused Maureen's stroke, and was then able to move a stent retriever from the femoral artery in her leg to her neck. It's one of the highlights of our career that we're able to help people such as Mrs. Hatcher, Dr. Agibraham explains. Luckily, the surgeons of Baptist Medical Center Jacksonville were able to clear the blood clot that caused a life-threatening risk. The surgery ended successfully and Maureen was discharged after 3 days of hospitalization. And what about Sadie and Bella? I am blessed I don't have any residual effects, and I attribute that to Dr. Nima and what the staff there did for me, said Maureen emotionally. Doctors were her saviors, but the real heroes were her amazing dogs. If it weren't for them, no one would have had the slightest of a clue about Maureen's state. She owns her rebirth to her dogs, and for them, what she can only say is, had it not been for my dogs going and getting my neighbor, I wouldn't be here today. I had an angel across the street. I had a great rescue in the neighborhood and the hospital. By rights, I shouldn't be in the shape that I'm in. I'm blessed. People asked Maureen if Bella and Sadie were trained to service dogs, And her answer amused all. She said, "The next thing I knew, I was eating the floor and couldn't move. And I said to my girls, the dogs, I need help. Someone asked me, how did you train them to do that? And I just told them, I didn't train them." The coming Christmas, Maureen made sure to give her furry friends an amazing treat. There were presents under the tree and prime rib for dinner, and they were spoiled rotten, mentioned the 61-year-old. People couldn't help but become fans of these furry heroes once their story reached social media. Their story was shared more than thousands of times. People started to share their own similar experiences too. One user mentioned, "Many years ago, my dog saved me when another dog attacked me while I was jogging. I saved her from being put down in a shelter, and she saved me. She was the best girl ever, no greater love."